So Dennis Chan grew up in Jacksonville, where his family has owned 12 restaurants in the past 8 decades. His earliest memories of food include standing on a little stool next to his grandfather's restaurant stove while watching him cook. Somehow Dennis always knew that he would end up in the restaurant business. He opened Blue Bamboo in his hometown in 2005 after graduating from the prestigious Culinary Institute of America and working with the Disney company and celebrity chef Ming Tsai. Chef Dennis is an adjunct professor at Florida State College at Jacksonville and teaches personal enrichment cooking classes at Blue Bamboo. Chan's first cookbook, Hip Asian Comfort Food, was published in 2009. He has also served as president of the Florida Restaurant and Lodging Association Northeast Chapter. Dennis won the 2018 Neighborhood to Nation Recipe Contest by General Mills and was chosen as one of 16 chefs to participate in Hormel Foods' Culinary Enrichment and Innovation Program. Chef Chan lives in Jacksonville, Florida with his wife Elizabeth and 7-year-old sons Bennett and Michael. He says, "After working around the country, I am so happy to have found my way back home." A supporter of many local organizations, Dennis believes that there is a place in everyone's heart and schedule for worthwhile organizations. So, yes, that's great. And Dennis will be joined in conversation with Titus, officially known as the boss of food in her family. Interviewer Lauren Titus is a longtime Northeast Florida resident who brings over 30 years of experience in our area's local food movement to the magazine Edible Northeast Florida. Along with a passion and expertise in baking and front yard farming, after a career in digital production and enterprise content management, Lauren is excited to be focused on her first loves, writing and talking about food and the vital role it plays in our community. Lauren lives with her husband in St. Augustine, and while her children have flown from the nest, they continue to support the local food scenes in Austin and Los Angeles. I'll go ahead and leave it to Lauren.
Thank you, and welcome everyone. This is a very exciting opportunity for me to talk to one of our local esteemed chefs, Dennis Chan. Welcome.
Thanks, Lauren.
So I'm going to just jump right into it and find out, why did you want to write a cookbook?
Oh, gosh. Well, we've been teaching classes here in Jacksonville at Blue Bamboo for a few years, and people were asking, when are you going to write a cookbook? When are you going to write a cookbook? And I just wasn't sure which recipes I wanted to put into this cookbook. So started collecting, testing all different recipes, and finally I said, it's time. We have enough recipes to pick from. So I also went to something called Cookbook Camp, and that was with the Lee brothers, who had a hugely successful Southern cookbook. And you take 3 days, you go to Charleston. They show you all of Charleston. They talk about all the different ways to write your book, how to recipe test, and all the different ways to publish. And that certainly was big inspiration.
So when you were at the Culinary Institute of America, did you know at some point you were both going to have your own restaurant and also publish a cookbook?
That was always the dream. But I asked some of the instructors who had been there for decades, and I asked one in particular who was our first skills teacher. And I said, his name was Chef Almquist. I said, Chef Almquist, how do you know? What do you see in these young chefs that you know that they're going to be successful and follow their dreams? And I said, what is it that you see? He says, you never know. He said he's taught so many hundreds of thousands of students, and some of the ones that he never thought would do something ended up doing something. Mm-hmm. And there's a perfect example. One of my classmates in culinary school, he dropped out after the first 6 months, and he worked at great places, with Jean-Louis Paladin in New York and places in DC. And he dropped out after 6 months, and he's the one that has a chain of meatball shops in New York City. He also has reality TV shows. He goes from one reality TV show to another. So, and he was in that class with me with Chef Almquist. So.
Sometimes it's just a natural talent that'll propel somebody to
yes, and a
excel.
drive.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned at some point you felt like you had enough recipes. Can you talk about that process of figuring out which recipes are going to appeal to a home cook versus what you sell at the restaurant?
Certainly. You know, there's so many recipes that I wanted to put into our first cookbook. So I had help with a lady named Kim Benton, and her company is ABC Book Publishing. And she helps create books for you, whether it's a novel, cookbook. We were her first cookbook. And so she said, okay, you know, give me your recipes, the titles, and we'll try to fit them in to however you want to make your categories. So we did traditional, which was appetizers, cocktails, entrees, noodles, and desserts. And so she laid it all out to see how many recipes you had in each section, and from there you pick the ones that you think will sell your book. And there's a little bit of a formula to it that you know, I didn't realize. I was just a cook. I didn't know that publishing was that way.
So when you're cooking in a restaurant, you may have a concept of a recipe, but I know chefs who typically will tweak it here and there as they're going. Did you have any challenges kind of standardizing your recipes for a cookbook?
Yeah, that's really important with a cookbook, because you want the home cook to be able to replicate everything. And, you know, baking, any kind of baking is much more precise than cooking, because cooking you can add a little bit more salt, a little bit more seasoning, and it'll still turn out delicious. But with baking, it's an exact science. So you have to have that baking mindset when you go to writing a recipe for a cookbook, because you want people to be able to cook from it. You want people to keep cooking from it, because if a recipe doesn't turn out the first time, someone's just going to close that book, and it's going to be a space holder in their library.
And what about scaling the recipes? Because in a restaurant, of course, you're cooking for a lot of people, like a stock or, you know, some entree. Was it challenging to kind of refine it so that it could serve 4 to 6 people at home?
It takes a lot of testing. And so we would take our big recipes for the quantity that we need at the restaurant, and then the starting point is to divide it as if you were to do it just for 1 or so per, and then you scale it to 4, and then you test it, and you test it again, because sometimes you salt for 20 and it's not enough for 4 when you break it down scale wise. So it does take a lot of testing.
Did you have a stable of testers available to go through the process with you?
Luckily, we had a restaurant, so we had guests that would you know, they always loved to taste something if you would just send it out there.
Yeah. Did you include any recipes that you don't serve at the restaurant at the time?
Well, we served everything as a special at the very least. Some of them are regular items on our menu, and so now that it's been a few years since our first book, some of them are brought on just as specials, and it's all new again when we, you know, because we moved locations a few years ago. So some of these items are new to that restaurant. In fact, just just this weekend for Mother's Day, we ran a special on our chicken pot pie, which the recipe is in the book. And I asked my nephew who works with me in the kitchen, I said, have we made this recipe here in this kitchen yet? And he said, no, it's been since the old restaurant when we made that recipe last.
Were there any techniques that you used in the restaurant that you were concerned a home cook wouldn't be able to master?
Certainly, some of the items like wok cooking, it requires a lot of heat. So when you see a restaurant cook in a wok, it's got these huge flames that just come up the side of the wok. And you could tell everyone in the cookbook to go and buy a turkey fryer and go outside and cook like that with the big flames, or you could just adjust the recipe so that it takes a little bit more time, but you can cook it on a home stove. And that's generally the path that we chose.
And have you had any feedback from any of your readers about, I tried that recipe at home and it just didn't taste like it does at the restaurant?
We have had that a couple of times, and the offer is always out there for anyone who has the book to call if you're in process, and I'll answer your questions while you're in process. And so the couple of people that have done that, they have called me and said, I'm at this point, and I said, okay, well, look at this other page, and it tells you how to do that other step. Like the shrimp and grits recipe in this book, I have a really good customer who enjoyed that recipe so much in our restaurant, and she was making it at home, and she says, but it doesn't teach you how to do the grit cakes in the recipe. And I said, yes, just turn to this page and it has the recipes to do. And she says, oh. So then she made it and then sent me pictures of what she made, and it looked great. It made me hungry for it, and I see it all the time.
Well, that sounds like it was successful then. When you was the finished product what you envisioned, or how would you do it differently if you were doing it today?
Well, with the first book, it turned out way better than I had ever imagined. And there's nothing like, and I know that some of you are looking to write cookbooks, there's nothing like that feeling of having your cookbook in your hands after you've worked so hard to put it all together. So the first book turned out exactly how I wanted to. The second book, because and we did that traditionally, we printed it and stored it, and so the second book, Kim, who was helping me with the second book, I said, well, how do we do it so that we don't have to hold so much inventory? And she suggested print on demand. And that way we can print what we need in smaller quantities and not have to hold it all the time. And that also turned out, some of the photos, we went with a professional photographer for the first book, and the second book I said, let's try to do this on our own. And we did, and I was surprised how the pictures looked afterwards, because there are some inspiration photos that I wanted, and I asked some friends over, like for the cover, I asked some friends over and I said, I need you all to come with your best bling. I don't care if you wear diamond bracelets or, rings, whatever you want. And so they came and they lived up to the task, and we cooked the different foods. We photographed them separately and then put them all on one table, and they, so I'm very happy with both products.
So let's talk a little bit about the name of the book, Hip Asian Comfort Food. Mm-hmm. And I know that is kind of the style that you serve at the restaurant, but can you define that for us and tell us what that really means to you?
Well, at first we said, okay, what do we call this book? Because you're writing this cookbook and you don't know what the title is going to be yet. And so I said, well, Hip Asian Comfort Food sounds good because it talks about the food that we like to eat. So the Hip Asian part is from a legacy of, eating Asian food, cooking Asian food in my grandfather's restaurants, and then the comfort food comes in because it's the stuff that we all like to eat. So that's always been, since the book, that was our philosophy at the restaurant. As we grew and moved to the new restaurant, we thought that we needed a book that was a little bit more segmented. So it's a book for gatherings. So it's a book for whether you have a group of lady friends coming over for lunch, or whether you have a group of college friends that want to come over for cocktails, or family gatherings. So that's how we divided up this book into chapters, was based on the type of gathering that you have. And the first book was more traditional in courses.
But it's still hip.
Still hip.
Yeah.
Yeah. If you look at all the pictures, it's a little different from stuff you would find in a traditional restaurant.
You mentioned the photography in this one. Can you tell us a little bit about that process and what really goes into food photography?
Yeah, so much goes into food photography. It's different, you hear about food styling, and you hear about how people use glue instead of milk and all that stuff. It was important to us to photograph the food as it really was food. So if you have a good photographer, which we did, we had Linda Blakely. She was a business neighbor of ours. She had a wine shop across the street, but she also did beautiful photography. And so she was great. I would plate something, I would send it out of our kitchen, and she would find the right light in the dining room. We did this in between lunch and dinner over the course of maybe 5 weeks. And she would find the right light, shoot the picture, and then we would move on to the next dish. So we had all the text written before we did the photos. And I couldn't be happier with how it all turned out. And it was neat because this picture, when we were looking for a cover for this first book, the designer, the layout person, made us mock layouts of different pictures that could have been put on the cover. And this one just spoke to us, and we said, that's got to be it. So.
You make it sound like it was 1, 2, 3, we found the light, we took the photo, but it really takes a little more time than that, doesn't it?
Oh, yes. So, if with food photography, if you look at the dish, there's shadows everywhere. So the photographer will take like a white board or a white piece of paper and put it on one side of the plate just to get rid of a shadow. And so there's all that part of it, and then there's also the part of editing it afterwards. And she may say, "Oh, that red looks a little too red," and I'll pull some of that out. And I was surprised at all the work she put into that just to make the photos look great.
Did you get feedback afterwards about recipes that were not in the book that some of your customers were hoping to get the secrets of?
Absolutely. That's why we had to do the second book. So one of the things that we were known for at our first restaurant was our flaxseed crackers. And my mom used to roll those out every day and then bake them off. And that was just something we had in the restaurant. And so we served those flaxseed crackers with an edamame spread, which is kind of like a hummus, but it's more like just a flavorful butter that goes with our crackers. And so we had the recipe for the crackers, but I forgot to put the recipe and for the edamame spread that we serve it with at the restaurant. So people ask all the time, and I used to write it out every time. I always made a deal. If you buy the book, I'll give you the recipe for the edamame spread. So I just hand wrote it out. And so when we did this book, I said, we have to do the edamame spread in this book. So yeah, that's one of the recipes that was most asked for.
Did you find any of the recipes as you were developing them for the cookbook, you realized it wasn't going to work for home cooks, so you kind of modified it to tweak it a little bit to make it either easier or change the flavor profile of it?
Those are the ones that ended up on the cutting room floor. We just said, forget it, it's too much work. We're not going to do those. But yeah, there were some that we had to change to make them, some of them because of ingredients. We didn't want to have something that someone had to go to a specialty store or drive all over town just to get ingredients to make the recipe. So we try to make it so that all the ingredients can be found at your local store.
Did you feel that as you were writing it, you were not only providing insight to your philosophy of cooking, but also you were helping your readers, your eaters, understand more about this type of cuisine and where it comes from? Did you feel more like an educator than a culinarian?
That comes from our cooking classes too. In this book, we tried to capture what it's like to explore that section of the grocery store. So, say you go to the Asian aisle in the grocery store, there's so many different ingredients that you don't know about. There are recipes in here that use one or two of those ingredients, and it gives people the confidence to, dive deeper into Asian cooking.
And did you get that kind of feedback where someone said, oh, I've never cooked with mirin before, and I tried it, I love what it adds to a dish, so I've started putting it in my salad dressing, or things like that?
I get that now all the time. Yes.
Yeah, that must feel gratifying.
It's great that people are using the ingredients, because I don't want them to just have that ingredient for one item and that they make out of the book. I'd love for them to use it, and the tough part is when they start getting, like, there are a couple of recipes with fish sauce in here, and that's so stinky that no one wants that around their house. But if you find another use for it, great. It's not good in cocktails, by the way.
What kind of lessons did you learn from the process? Because it looks like you did venture into a second book, so what kind of lessons did you apply to that?
It really made me a lot more organized. You have to stick to a timeline. So for this book, we wanted it to be out before Christmas of last year. And so we backed out into that timeline in order to turn things in at the right time. And it really helps to have someone that says, you need to give me this, which is any editor will tell you, okay, I need this by this date, I need this by that date. And it's that's really the key to publishing your cookbook.
Well, having worked with many chefs who kind of work up to the very last minute of when a dish needs to be served, it's admirable that you were able to stick to a deadline and get it done.
There were some late nights, but we did it.
You mentioned the cooking classes as a way to help people understand more about ingredients, and I don't know if you're still doing it, but some classes you would actually go to the markets to shop for the ingredients that you would be cooking with. Can you talk a little bit about that process?
Sure. Once a quarter, we do cooking classes once a month on a Saturday morning. But once a quarter, we'll take a field trip class to a local Asian market, and we'll explore the Asian market, and we'll walk through the aisles. We'll talk about different ingredients and how to use them, and then we'll see what inspires us in that Asian market and buy the stuff and come back and cook it in the restaurant. So it's a neat way to go and learn how to do it.
You mentioned cooking by what you see and be inspired by it. Do you find that cooking in the restaurant is sometimes too constraining, that you have to stick to a dish as it's described on the menu, for instance, or what people expect, and it doesn't give you enough opportunity to get creative with it?
Well, we're lucky that we can do specials, and that's usually where the fresh, newest ingredients come in. We have our regular menu, which is stuff that people keep coming back for, but then we have like the market that we go to most often has their own farm in Elkton. So there are a lot of Asian produce items that they grow there, and we can bring those back into the restaurant. Right now we're running some Japanese eggplant that we're cooking with a sweet and sour sauce. That is our special. Corn in the summer is my favorite special to run, because we take them, we cut them into little cobs, cook them a little bit, and then take some ginger, garlic, sizzle it in the pan, add the corn to it, salt them, and it's just a delicious little side dish to have. Yeah.
Do you have a favorite recipe in the cookbook?
Well, it depends on the day. Sometimes I just don't have the time to make the dumplings and stuff that are on some of the pages. The red curry shrimp dish in this book is probably the most sought after and the one that people make the most often. And in this one, of course, the edamame spread is what people are after.
Are there any recipes that you're sorry you included, because they really, when you look back at them, they just don't cut it for you anymore?
Well, every recipe has a purpose in this book, in both books, and so it kind of, once you put it in print, it kind of defines the type of cooking that you do. So no regrets.
No regrets, okay. You mentioned corn and Japanese eggplant. What are some of your other favorite ingredients to cook with?
Well, right now the market is really full with different types of bok choys. And so there's the Taiwanese bok choy, which has a longer stem. Bok choy is like a cross between celery and cabbage. And so the Taiwan bok choys have a long white rib, and it's so sweet right now. You just take a little bit of oil, swirl it in your wok, and cook it with a little bit of salt and pepper, and it's just a delicious side.
So it sounds like that's one of the seasonal kind of ingredients that you can use as a special, or bok choy is a common ingredient that you use, right? So are you able to swap in the Taiwanese when it's in season, and do people notice?
We run that as a side.
Okay.
What we get year round, even when it's not in season, it's just that. So right now, the Shanghai bok choy, which is the one with the green rib, is not as readily available here in this area. So we're paying a lot more for it, like 3 times the amount for it. But that's always on our menu. So the items on our menu, we know we can get year round. And then the seasonal stuff is what we run as specials.
And for recipes in the cookbook, is it easy to substitute when, if someone can't find an ingredient?
Absolutely. In fact, most of the recipes will say your favorite vegetable. Choose 3 of your favorite vegetables and put them into your...
So it not only it gives a home cook an outline, a framework, but it also helps cultivate their creativity in the kitchen by using your recipes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's the best compliment to any teacher, is that when you see someone do something that you've taught them to do, and they run with it.
Do you feel that you're more of a chef or an educator?
That's a great. I see myself more as an educator, because even as in the chef role, you have to teach your employees to replicate what you want them to do.
Yeah, and it's not only in the kitchen, but you're also educating people on flavor profiles and how to cook using different techniques and ingredients and so on. So your education is spreading outside of your restaurant's kitchen as well.
It's funny that you say that. Yesterday, I had one of my pretty seasoned line cooks. We had a wine dinner at the restaurant, so we did 4 courses, and I said to the line cook, I said, "Here, taste this." And it's, she's had, it was just fried. It looked like it was just fried chicken. She tasted it and she said, "What did you do to this chicken? Is just tender and delicious, perfectly seasoned." And I said, "Well, you start with a tenderloin instead of a breast," because all she knew was, she's used to cooking a chicken breast at home. And I said, "You start with a tenderloin and you pull it up just as you see the corners starting to turn brown." And so I said, "Go ahead and try it and do it." So she did it, and it was a big victory for her. She was so happy with the result. And so I guess the answer is I'm more of a teacher than
Yeah, that must be gratifying, though, to see that light bulb come on in a chef or a home cook's eyes as you're talking to them about things.
It doesn't always happen. Sometimes sometimes you can try to teach someone and they think you're crazy for trying to teach them.
Have you had any of the home cooks in your cooking class turn professional?
More of the, when I taught at the college level, more of those students have turned professional. We've had some young students in our cooking classes that have gone on to culinary school after the personal enrichment school. And even at the restaurant, I've had 3 students now who have gone to the CIA. And that's really the best feeling, is that to have a student follow in your footsteps and go to that school. It's a great thing.
So we haven't talked really about beverages. And do you have recommendations on different types of beverages that work well with your dishes?
Oh yes, there's a section in the first book about pairing wines to the foods that we cook in this book. And then in the second, and there's also a cocktail section, because every party deserves great cocktails. And then in the Let's Eat cookbook, there are a lot of cocktails for different occasions in that book. And there's also, it talks about techniques and flavor combinations too. For instance, one of our most popular cocktails at Blue Bamboo is the cucumber smash. And it's very simple: cucumber, lime, and vodka, and a little bit of simple syrup. And it's a delicious, refreshing cocktail. And that's one of the cocktails that one of our employees came up with, created, and tested. And that recipe's in the first book.
And so you've done your first 2 cookbooks. Do you have any other cookbooks on the horizon? The
next one, I talked to Kim, the person that helps me with all the books. And I told her that, okay, 2 years, so that's the goal, in 2 years to have another book. And I don't know if we'll have smaller mini books in between, or if we're just going for the next hardbound book.
Well, you better get back to the kitchen and do some recipe development.
More recipe testing, yes. Yes.
Cool. Let's see. I think that's it. Are we ready for questions from the audience? Before, I know we have books here, but if anyone watching on the Zoom would like a copy, where can they find the cookbooks?
We have them at Blue Bamboo, and if you want to go to the bookmark, I'll make sure Rona has cookbooks there available.
Okay, great.
Well, thank you both for such wonderful conversation. We're going to go ahead and open it up to audience questions here. So if you have any questions, please do write them down. And for our Zoom audience, please do write them up in the chat. Me and a volunteer will go around and collect them. So if you have one and I don't happen to see you, please raise them up and we'll go ahead and take them and bring them to Lauren.
I have one other question. Did you gain weight while you were working on the cookbook?
That's my favorite pastime. So,
or maybe it was the taste testers that gained the weight.
Both, yes. Yeah. That's my resolution every year. Then I can always make it come true.
What recipe was the most challenging to scale down for a cookbook? And how many times did you have to make it to get it right?
That's a great question. And the tiramisu recipe in here was probably the one that we had to scale down the most, because we're making big pans of it. And so the recipe, what we finally ended up with, was enough for a home cook to. And as far as how many times, I don't know, maybe 10 times we did. Because that's really the hardest recipe in the book. So you have many steps, and then you also have to feel out all the proportions too. So.
Cool. What is your favorite recipe for duck?
Favorite recipe for duck is to roast it. Whether it's a duck breast or a whole duck. What we do at the restaurant is we marinate a whole duck. We stuff it with a flavoring. We take, it's kind of a mirepoix. It's celery, carrots, onions, and we use a ground bean sauce that is a Chinese flavoring. And we put that into the duck. We skewer it shut. And we roast the whole thing. We let it sit overnight, and then we roast it for 45 minutes on each side. And that's how that's our duck recipe.
And does the skin get crispy that way?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. We use a breeder out of Indiana that we like their ducks because the fat ratio is good enough where the skin gets really crispy.
Cool. What culinary innovation are you most proud of?
From us or from?
I think from you.
From us, okay. I think if you count the restaurant as an innovation, we have at our new Blue Bamboo, which is now 2 years old, we were able to build a restaurant from scratch. And if you ever have worked in a restaurant, and we were at our old location for 16 years, so we knew what we liked, what we didn't like about our space. And we were able to build this exactly how we wanted it. So the equipment we wanted, the flow of what we wanted. We even have a robot that helps us run food so that the servers can stay in the dining room a little bit more to tend to what our guests need. And that, I think, as far as fun innovation, that robot is really a big help. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's other restaurants in this area who have
I
that
think
kind
we're the only one. But when a server can only carry maybe 3 plates if they're really good, and the robot can carry 5, that saves a trip of going back and forth.
Makes it more
from
efficient.
The kitchen. Yeah.
What are your top 3 favorite ingredients?
Top 3 favorite ingredients. Every Asian dish should have ginger, garlic, and scallion in it. And that, if you start with those 3 ingredients, that is the Asian mirepoix. And, in French cooking, you have mirepoix is celery, carrot, and onion, or a product of each of those. The Asian mirepoix is ginger, garlic, and scallion. And if you start with that, you build layers of flavor in everything that you cook.
And I guess this is at the restaurant. Would you consider special seatings for vegetarian dim sum or Chinese New Year?
Yep, we
You do a dim sum, don't you?
We do dim sum once a month. That is, we call them dim sum Sundays. We have done dim sum here in Jacksonville since 2001, I think was our first year doing it. And, growing up, we always went to dim sum, and it was always in the bigger cities. And then whenever we would get a dim sum restaurant here in Jacksonville, you had to go when it first opened because you knew it wouldn't last long. Most of them would last a year, and now there's more. But in 2011, I think is what I meant to say if I didn't say it. That's when we did our first dim sum Sunday, and we were doing them once a quarter, and we saw that there was demand to do them once a month. So we do them once a month, and we still do them once a month. And it's a whole different way of setting up your kitchen. So you have to have a steamer, you have to have a different wok set up. It's bad because you can't offer what you normally offer or in our restaurant, but it's great because we're offering all different things.
Can you describe dim sum in case folks don't know what that is?
If with all this social media, all those little baskets of dumplings, that's what dim sum is, or little fried items, or
So someone can have a sampling of a lot of different dishes at a dim sum.
Dim sum translates to a little bit of heart. So you're supposed to imagine a little bit of heart in every dish that you have that's dim sum. And vegans and vegetarians, we have a big vegan vegetarian following because we love cooking that way. And some of the items on our menu are vegetarian, vegan, and they're vegan, and we don't label them as such because, they're there for us to tell if people ask.
And a lot of the dishes can be adapted to be vegetarian at least.
Yes. Yes.
How about Chinese New Year? Do you do any kind of a celebration for that?
Oh, yes. Every Chinese New Year we do specials. They are, the Chinese believe that what you eat it's like the Southern, we have black-eyed peas and collard greens on New Year's. So the Chinese believe that you eat things to bring you happiness, bring wealth, and we detail that on our New Year's special menus. We always tell you, you eat this for wealth luck, you eat this for family luck, you eat this for romance, different things.
Good
so,
health.
Yeah.
And that's typically in end of January, early February? Is that when Chinese?
Generally,
yeah,
yes.
January.
Yeah. Oh, and you were asking about the vegetarian dishes. One of our favorite items on the menu, we have General's cauliflower, and you don't miss that meat when you have that. It does have buttermilk in the dish, so that's not vegan, but if we know ahead, we can substitute it with a almond milk or a coconut milk.
Can you please share a bit more about your family heritage and history and how this influenced your cooking?
My grandparents, my grandfather, moved here from Canton, China, right outside of Hong Kong. He came over with the U.S. Army and settled in Jacksonville because the climate was the closest to his home in China, in southern China. And so when he left the Army, he started working in restaurants in New York City, and then he opened a restaurant here. He moved down here. He opened a restaurant in La Villa, in the La Villa section of downtown. And it was at the corner of Ashley and Davis Street. And when we were signing paperwork for building our restaurant now, which is my dream restaurant, I went to the bank who financed us, and their offices are at the corner of Ashley and Davis Street. So if that wasn't a sign that we were doing the right thing, I don't know what was.
And so your grandfather had several restaurants in the area?
Yep, that was his first restaurant, and then he opened other restaurants with partners in downtown, and then over on South Side, and then he retired. My uncle took over the restaurants, opened other restaurants, and then brought my parents in as partners, and so in my lifetime, my family's had 12 restaurants. And here in Jacksonville, always here in Jacksonville.
And when your parents learned that you were going into the restaurant business, did they say, no, run away?
When I was growing up, my parents did everything they could to sway me away from the restaurant business. And my dad, before he retired, he worked for the health department. So he, in newborn screening. So he had a long career in, every child that's born in Florida has 3 drops of blood taken from their heel so that they can test for 30-something infectious diseases. And that's his labs did all that testing. And so he really did not want me to go in the restaurant business. That was their side gig, was the restaurant business. And so when I think now my dad's proud and my mom and dad are proud because, they see what we've built over these many years. But when we were going into it, they said, you're wasting your time. Why would you want to do that? So,
what else would you have done?
I think of that often. What else would I like to do? And I'm really doing what I love. So it's hard. It's hard to do. And I think, if anything, I'd be teaching something. I don't know if I'd be teaching bad things or what, but I'd be teaching something.
I have read that, and pardon my pronunciation, Shaoxing wine is needed for authentic Chinese/Asian food. Is that true? And if so, where can it be purchased?
The substitute for Shaoxing wine is dry sherry. You'll get a close enough flavor with that, but any Asian market has Shaoxing wine. And you'll have to ask the people who work at the market, because sometimes it is not clear that that's what it is. But yeah, you can. Everyone stocks it. It's not easily visible, but everyone stocks it.
And you've traveled in China, correct? Mm-hmm. And how do you compare the American version of a lot of the ingredients to what you find over there?
Well, I'm going to start by saying China has come a long way. But when I was in college, I went to study abroad in China, and everything was either white or brown. They had no green vegetables, no, what we grew up with Chinese American food, it was comfort food for me. So when I went to study abroad and all this, cauliflower, steamed bread, boiled meats, in Xi'an, where it was not appealing. I lost 50 pounds. I was a fat kid, but I lost 50 pounds when I went to study abroad there. And so I thought the food in China was terrible. But, about 5 years ago, I have two sons that are from China, adopted from China, and the food has come a long way. And if you go to China now and see the beautiful colors, the beautiful flavors, the beautiful textures, it's so different than what I knew from 25 years ago.
Mm-hmm. And do you feel that ingredients one can find here can replicate and?
Yes, 100%. They export so much of what they make there. One of the items that I had 5 years ago was, going back to cauliflower. It's a Chinese-style cauliflower, which is a lot more stringy than ours and less flour. It's just got a nice texture to it, and you can get that at the local Asian markets now. Every one of them sell that. Yeah. And leek flowers too. They have the flour of a leek. You can get that now. They're kind of curl around because they're so heavy, but you can get those here. Mm-hmm. Someone smuggled seeds over somehow. And,
which is your favorite market to shop at?
Out on Beach Boulevard, there's La Salsa Market, and she's got a neat story because she started out at the flea market on Beach Boulevard. She opened a produce stall, and then she sold Mexican and Asian ingredients. So she was known as the La Salsa Lady. Well, she went and opened a store further down Beach Boulevard, a permanent store, and she called it La Salsa. You walk into this store, it's an Asian market. It's got like soy sauces on one side and then produce on the other. So I think that works against her, but anyway, she's got a great selection. Jack's Oriental near us over on St. Augustine Road in the Mandarin area, they're the best stocked market. They've been in business quite a long time. Annie and Jake are the owners there. Jake has a trucking route that he'll go down to Miami and up to Atlanta and up to New York and then come back down. So he'll take ingredients that he grows at their farm up to those areas and then bring back ingredients to sell at the store. Yeah.
Let's see. After serving dim sum recipes in your book and hearing that one of your hobbies is visiting other restaurants, saw it on a YouTube interview, where do you go for dim sum?
Okay, so in the last couple of months, last 6 months, I've taken my mom and my family down to Orlando. They have had about 3 or 4 new fancy dim sum restaurants that have opened down there. One is called Dim Dim Sum, and they're actually a couple that has been in business a long time in Orlando. They've since opened this newer restaurant that's in the Dr. Phillips area, and then there is one called YH Seafood Kitchen, and that's on the Sand Lake Road area. And my mom said when we walked into the place, she said, "Oh, this is like the places I see on all the videos in China." And she's American born and American raised, but she says, "This looks like the videos that I see of all those fancy restaurants in China." Mm-hmm. And they do a really good job too. The food's good.
And any place in the Jacksonville area that you like to
Tim Hua is the best dim sum restaurant here in town. They're small, but they put out some beautiful food.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Cool. What's the best shrimp to cook with and the size?
Well, you know, we live here near Mayport. Mayport shrimp is the best that we can get. When we can get it, we use it, but you know, it's hard to find, because when we do our volume, it's hard to have it all the time already peeled and deveined for our needs. Mm-hmm. But yeah, the bigger the better. So use whatever size you can get.
What's the most valuable thing your grandfather taught you?
I think, you know, there's so many things that he taught me, but the one thing that he taught me was the sense of community, and to get, you know, just to know who's around you and what people do. And he really was in business for the long haul. You know, one of the business relationships that we have, Martin Coffee started, and Mr. Martin used to sell coffee to my grandfather, and now his grandson Ben sells coffee to us.
That's great. Do you need help with testing recipes?
Always.
If so, how do I contact you?
Come on into Blue Bamboo. Now that we're talking about cookbooks, you've inspired me to work on this next cookbook. So.
Where can I find information on your cooking classes?
Our cooking classes, our website is bluebamboojacksonville.com. It's very easy. We always have a section that lists all of our cooking classes.
Mm-hmm, okay. And do you have a cooking class coming up for General's Chicken?
Just message me and I'll make sure I include that in one of our cooking classes.
Do you have any secrets to make tasty food with very low sodium?
Yeah, well, that ginger, garlic, and scallion will give you enough flavor without having to add too much salt.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Is your orange cake recipe in the cookbook?
Orange cake is in our first cookbook. We had to adjust it a little bit to win the contest. Mm-hmm. But you know that when we use the Pillsbury and General Mills products for the, if you follow the recipe and use those products, then you come pretty close
mm-hmm.
to.
Can you talk a little bit more about that cake and the competition that you entered?
Yep. In 2018, we entered the Neighborhood to Nation recipe contest. Everyone knows that Pillsbury has a Pillsbury Bake-Off for home bakers. They wanted to do something for professional chefs. So they had this Neighborhood to Nation recipe contest, and we entered our mandarin orange cake, adjusted with the Pillsbury ingredients, and they chose us as a finalist. And then they came, and the Pillsbury Doughboy was there, and I kind of had a hunch that they may have chosen us for the national prize, and sure enough, they awarded us the national prize.
Oh, so you didn't know before the Pillsbury Doughboy showed up?
No, he was the clue that kind of tipped it off.